Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 22nd Annual Rutgers Jewish Film Festival. I'm Professor Nancy Sinkoff. I'm the Academic Director of the Alan and Joan Bildner Center for the Study of Jewish Life and a Professor of Jewish Studies and History here at Rutgers. And I'm delighted to welcome you, and I'm particularly delighted to welcome you to this webinar with the writer and main protagonist of American Birthright, Becky Tahel Bordo, and who's my interlocutor on the other side of the screen here. And I want to introduce Becky to you, and then I have a series of questions for her, which will allow a conversation to emerge about the film and how she made it and all the other things that are not self-evident from the film itself. And you'll be able to listen to this after you screen the film or even before as part of your pass to the Rutgers Jewish Film Festival. So Becky Tahel Bordo is an Israeli-born, Los Angeles-based curator of conscious content. As an international writer-producer, she created the interfaith marriage and Jewish identity documentary, American Birthright, which has garnered international acclaim. She was most recently the senior writer-producer at Shetty's global media company, where she produced over 30 million views for a handful of global influencers. I don't even know what that means. I'm a historian. Becky founded Mannafest Media, a conscious content studio with her husband, Nathan Ben David, and we can talk more about it at the very end. Mannafest Media is an advocate for ethically sound sourced content and the use of content creation as a self-development tool. And Becky consults and speaks globally. She also has a long independent movie database history as a producer, as an actor, as a performance artist. So if you Google her, you will find out all the other things she did before she embarked on American Birthright. So welcome, Becky Tahel Bordo. So happy to have you here.
So great to be here.
So the film, as you know, and as I know, I've screened it several times, is really a self-confessional journey. So there's a lot of self-reflection in it, which will be evident when you watch it. But I do have a series of questions about it. The prompt, or at least we're told, or you tell us during the film, that the prompt for making the film was your beloved younger sister Gal's decision to get married to her long-term boyfriend, who is not Jewish. So that it seems that what you were embarked on initially was a film about intermarriage in the American landscape.
That's exactly right.
But they had been together for 8 years. So why now did you decide to do this? You could have done this 8 years ago. They were a serious couple. You meet Justin. He's lovely. He's crazy about your sister. What did you think? And what was it about the marriage per se that spawned your journey, or what you seem to be your journey? Yeah.
It's a great question. I think it was a perfect storm. It was a bit of my denial that Gal was actually going to marry Justin, just because in my mind, it was like, that's not what we do. She can date him. I dated a bunch of non-Jews, but we don't really marry them, do we? Not in our family. And that I just walked with that sort of preconceived notion about my situation, but also just sort of that was my truth until I got that text that she was getting engaged to be married. And then I realized, okay, this is certainly going to happen. I'm going to have a non-Jewish person in my family. And to try not sound like the most judgmental, small-minded person that there is, so I dated non-Jews. I had many non-Jewish friends. It wasn't like we weren't super assimilated. You know, I wasn't raised observant. I was in the conservative movement. My mom was a Jewish educator in a conservative school. We were around plenty of non-Jews, but for some reason, something about marriage and a life partnership to a non-Jewish person was never something I saw. Just never, it was so foreign to me. So as soon as she got engaged, and I knew that it was going to be a for real thing, and she was very serious about this, it brought up a lot of this sort of like, why am I feeling this way? And I feel really judgmental. I feel really prejudiced that I am being bumped by this decision. And at that exact time, I was like getting through my own 20s journey in LA, bumping into everything, because I mean, that's your 20s, but also that's a lot of LA. Who am I? Who do I want to end up with? What do I want to be known for? What's my purpose? And it just all sort of coalesced. And I felt like, maybe this is something I should explore. hiding behind characters and scripts. Maybe I pursue an honest journey, like smack into the middle of this really big question that seems to not just be my own question, but many other Jewish people and non-Jewish people's question. Do we marry like? Do we stay with people who are of our sort of in circle?
Well, do we marry? I mean, frankly, the idea,
right. Then do we marry at all? Right.
Do we marry? I mean, when one looks at the demographic landscape,
right,
people don't marry. So I think there is what is significant is that marriage actually says something publicly, and it's different than living together, as serious as a commitment that is, and what does that mean? And clearly that spawned or was a provocative moment for you. So you decide to go to Israel. Obviously you are Israeli born, you have Hebrew, it certainly is a passive, maybe a more active language now, you have family there, but were you always going to go to yeshiva? I mean, people go to Israel and do all kinds of things. What was the yeshiva piece about? Why did you do that?
It's a great, no, absolutely not. And if you told me at the beginning of this journey that I would end up in an Orthodox women's seminary in yeshiva, I would have laughed. I would have said, there's no way, that's so not me. That doesn't feel like who I am. And there was certainly a lot of fear and hesitation. And you see that in the movie as well. When I'm on the phone with my sister and I sort of am like, I'm afraid to be brainwashed. Like, I don't want to be converted, which is so funny, like converted to what? And I had to explore that fear. And I'm glad that I did. I'm glad I pushed against some of those things that I really didn't see myself doing. But so that, no, that absolutely was not part of the journey. I knew I wanted to educate myself. Like I said, my mom has been an educator, a Jewish educator for over 20 years. And so for me, education is absolutely like the backbone and the go-to to solve any problem. Like I'm absolutely more cerebral than I am like a heart-centered, how do I feel about this? It's like, let's go open a book and intellectualize this. So the place to go for me at first, as you see, is absolutely not to seminary. Like I did not want to be in this sort of institutionalized Orthodox Jewish setting because I felt like I already knew what they were going to tell me. Like I had assumed and I knew, and that block of I know this, I already know this, was keeping what I believe the ultimate version of the movie ended up being from being that. I was too afraid. I was too sort of resistant. When I finally made the decision, I was still very hesitant, but it felt like this sort of homecoming that needed to happen. And that's also akin to sort of the initial journey was American Birthright. I was going to do my American Birthright trip. I had done the Israeli version. I did the tour. I went to Eilat. We did Tzfat. We did Haifa. I wanted to do the American version on the way to my sister's wedding. And I very quickly realized this wasn't an American Birthright solely in America. I wasn't going to get those answers and like that deeper healing in America alone because my identity isn't purely American. So
right. I'll circle back to the Americanness of this later, but no, because I think it's a quintessentially American film. I'm a historian of the Jews of Europe and I teach US Jewish history as well. And I thought it's a very American film. That's not a criticism, that's just, I think, an analytic point. We can talk about that. But I'm curious, you did choose to go to an Orthodox women's midrashah, but there are other options for yeshivot in Israel. There's the conservative synagogue, conservative yeshiva. There's Pardes, which is egalitarian. There's Bina, which is secular. So how'd you end up at Neve Yerushalayim, the Orthodox seminary?
So in making the decision, of course, I had people who were a part of that, who said, if you're going to go and study and you want to know what the book says, go to the people who are like buy the book. And that, oddly enough, resonated because I said to myself, like, I've sort of always been fringy. Like I studied a lot of Eastern religions and I like that was sort of already in me and what I would gravitate towards, and to be somewhere so uncomfortable, and I could see myself really resisting that. And also if I wanted to know what the book said and I wanted that sort of like, this is what that is, I'd have to go there. So I popped into Pardes and I speak with one of their educators, Rabbi Tzvi Hirschfield, on in the movie. But when I went there, it didn't feel like where I wanted to be. Like I really always missed Neve. I would try some other ones out, a little bit more spirited, a little bit more spiritual. Like Neve is absolutely a Haredi, a sort of black and white by the book place that, again, totally didn't expect to really resonate with. But what I'll say is, I think there is sort of a lack of being really tough and almost like fire and brimstone in a lot of education that I've had Jewishly growing up, where it's sort of like, do your own thing. And for some people, they're like, they know who they are. And to do their own thing is like perfect direction for them. I am not that person. I didn't grow up with a lot of internal direction. And it's not that I needed someone to spoon feed me, but I needed a little bit more structure.
Mhm.
And I really found that at Neve. I found this sort of like, this is what it is. This is why we are very passionate about that. Absolutely, it's a highway, pick your lane, but this is truth. And I didn't quite get that in the other places. And I think that's what my soul and my sort of Jewish education path was wanting. And I'm glad I did that. There were absolutely moments when I was like, nope, not that either. That's not my rabbi. That's not my rebbitzin. And I'm glad that that was also nurtured and fostered. I think from the outside looking in, I was not expecting it to be as open within a very sort of strict framework as it was. Yeah.
So I have a question, when one watches the film, it's obviously been edited and you thought about it, but I obviously made all very conscious decisions as a filmmaker, but it appears very early that you decided to turn the camera on yourself. So it wasn't happenstance, right? So at what moment, you obviously were doing a lot of thinking about your sister, about the marriage, about Justin, about your family. At one point, did you just say, well, I'm not going to make a movie about intermarriage. I'm going to make a movie about Becky. When did that happen?
It's funny that you say it sort of seems early, because in my mind, like it just occurred to me as I watched this, oh, well, I clearly made this to sort of follow my sister and a bunch of rabbis talking about this. And in an editing, it was difficult to pull like honest Becky reactions or moments or confessionals, which is why we went back and created that series of these like master interviews throughout, where I'm in this red dress in Wilshire Temple in LA. And I was sort of hiding behind that. Like I didn't feel like some expert that could lead an intermarriage film. Like, who am I? I'm certainly not in the world. I do not know much about the Jewish history. And like, it just didn't feel like something I would do. And when I hit that wall, and it was two years into filming, I realized that I was standing in my film's way. Right. And like, I thought I'd have an aha moment, but my sister gets married and things don't progress. And I realized that I'm in my film's way. I was connected to this incredible writer in LA. And he intellectually sparred with me for about 45 minutes. And I was like, what are you trying to get me to see? And he said, think of Queen Esther. Think of that moment when she said, it's, am I going to stand up and do this? And I was like, are you likening me? I didn't get it. And then something sort of clicked and I said, oh, it's about whether I'm brave enough to step forward and own this as my narrative. Ooh, that's gross. But let me explore that a little bit. And I sat with it. And a producer friend was like, are you going to be bold enough to actually tell us at the end what you think? And we have a rabbi that asks that very question filmically. And it was very difficult for me to do that. It was very, very tricky. So yeah, it was the decision to turn the cameras inward was when the film hit a complete wall and I realized I was in the way. And the journey throughout, even in post-production, was tough of how much do I put myself? Does it become this sort of, oh, what was me, Jewish girl has a problem with her sister. I didn't want it to feel so small and not as existential as it felt. So it was tough to balance all of those parts.
It doesn't come off as small. I mean, rest assured, it doesn't, as someone who's seen it, it comes off, it is very much about you. It is a confessional autobiographical film. It is that, but no, it does not come off as small. And you have a wide range of interlocutors. I think some people might not know their differences. I mean, you have to know a certain kind of internal Jewish code. The women who are wearing shaitlach or covering their hair, or the woman who's not, the rabbi with a certain kind of kippah. I mean, there's internal Jewish code and not everyone knows that. But from someone who has some insight into that, I saw, and others can see clearly, that you interviewed a really wide range of people. And also from both LA and Philly, your Rabbi Neil Cooper and people at Pardes and at Neve. But I have a question, were there personalities or people who wouldn't participate, or those conversations got cut out? How did you work with that? The interpersonal and the intellectual pieces that didn't fit, or you wanted to fit, but they didn't want to participate?
You know, I got really lucky, and I feel like, lightning doesn't strike twice. And so this is one of those where I knew no one. And in the Jewish world, I feel like it is very much about sort of like, this person introduces you. And I know I'm the daughter of this rabbi. I had none of that. I didn't really come from a lineage of people connected in the Jewish world in that way. And so when I knocked on doors, there was initial hesitation. Absolutely. Like, a film about intermarriage. Who are you? What's the agenda? What's your final message? And my answer was always like, this is an honest journey. I don't actually know my final message yet. And for some people who hopped on a call and took that email and continued the conversation, they actually realized that I was absolutely documenting an honest journey. And they were like, yalla, like, let's go, let's do this. And some people who I don't even remember, because I felt like I reached out to a lot of people, and who comes to mind, who's no longer with us, but he was a fantastic rabbi who I was connected to. And I think I probably emailed his office and never heard back. And I think about it often now, is Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, who I am a humongous fan of, and his Torah just speaks so beautifully, and he's so worldly. It was so worldly and is so worldly, his Torah is. And I never made that connection. I never pushed further because, like you said, I was the protagonist and directing and producing, trying to make sure I had the money to do it, and studying and going through the process in real time.
Yeah.
There's just too much going on. So to me, it was like, whoever sort of, if it flowed and the person was open, well, that felt right. And each week when I was in seminary, there was a film day. It was like Thursday we film. And I would do my best while studying and figuring it out and going through my own crises, like fitting people into that Thursday day. And if someone was like, oh, I'm so sorry, last minute, I have to cancel, reschedule me or something, I'd be like, oh, there's God directing. Let me figure out how to produce this slot and put somebody else in. And it would be like the perfect person. Mm-hmm. So it was a really very divine process with that, because I was super surrendered. I'm not like that now. And I'm trying to remember the Becky of the surrender process back then, but I just I went with whoever didn't have too much resistance. Mm-hmm. And that ended up being a whole bunch of people.
Yeah, it was a lot of people. Yeah. It was not easy to get the office of the chief rabbi, Rabbi Lord Sachs, his attention. I mean, with all due respect, he actually came to Rutgers. And
really?
Yes, he did. We had an incredible
he's amazing.
He spoke to at the Bildner Center. Yes, he did. It was incredible. So I have a question about, and this is probably things that ended up on the cutting floor, and perhaps you already addressed it, but what were were there any internal conflicts for you as both a filmmaker, someone who has all this experience about narrative film, performance, and then yourself? I mean, how did you edit yourself, if it were?
It's a great question. And I had a really wonderful film partner, Erin Marie Davis, who's also a Philly girl. We met in LA, but we both went to Temple. And she did a really great job of being honest with me and also pushing back. I had become, as an actress, like relatively objective. Like I could look at some performance and be like, that doesn't feel really honest. I'm not buying that. And she'd be like, yeah, not either. And then some performances I'd be like, ooh, because I thought I looked all right. I looked good there. I liked my angle. She's like, nah, but you're performing. That's a performance. I don't like that. So and it's tough because when the cameras are there, it's as much as you want to be honest and in the moment, so many things were going on through my mind. Like, I want to make sure that I say what I'm meaning, but am I feeling it right now? Is this honest? There's so many voices in my head, as you see in the movie as well. And so we try to just really get rid of all the fat and keep the truly honest, real moments. And if they weren't there, we just were like, let's just not put them in there at all. Let's not have something just to fill it up. So we got rid of a lot of like Becky walking and talking through the streets of Jerusalem, like, reflecting. it didn't feel that we had a whole stop in Svat, which is like the beautiful mystical town in the north. I do yoga and I go through these tunnels and it's wonderful. And we realized like this whole beautiful epic stop, which is also very much the kind of Jew that I self-express as, spiritual, loves to meditate, loves experiential Judaism. It just didn't fit, didn't tell the right story. It wasn't a part of moving the movie forward. And so it was tough to sort of kill your darlings, as we say in writing, just got rid of it, got rid of a whole 5 minutes of like a beautiful piece of the movie. But it wasn't it. And it wasn't serving the audience. So I'd have to always sort of say, oh, I really like that moment, but I like it. My little I likes it, but the audience doesn't need it.
Right. Well, that's what good editing is. So your writing producer partner, she appears in the film a couple of times, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm jumping a little bit ahead of my questions, but are you still working with her or no?
Yeah.
You are.
Yeah, absolutely. Project dependent. She's, she's a busy lady too. So I try to fit in the things that feel right for her wheelhouse and the sorts of things that she wants to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
We obviously aren't in physical production on anything right now because of COVID and just all of the craziness that entails when it comes to physical production, but we are in post-production together on a few pieces, actually for the Jewish world. And I find that I often have Jewish organizations that come to me and say, do you have an editor with like a sensitivity to Jewish story? We obviously no discrimination. We're happy to work with anyone, but it helps when I'm like, it's funny enough, Erin's not Jewish, but her sensitivities are so sharp because she sometimes will know more than a lot of my Jewish friends just because of how much time and education she got and time she spent working with me on this film. So I do work with her on a lot of Jewish media as well. We're working on a couple things right now.
Terrific. I'll ask you more about that as we go forward. Yeah. So I have a question which seemed just getting to know you through your past and watching you in the film. So how did you reconcile, or how do you reconcile your clearly very assertive female, even feminist self? And I don't know what generation you are. I'm not going to guess. I can never keep track of the generations, but millennial, Gen Y, Z, whatever, millennial, and the values of Orthodox Judaism and gender expectations. I want to be very clear. I know, as most people know, that there is a lot of room within the gender divisions of Orthodoxy for women's agency, and we could talk a lot about that. But there's no doubt that there are gendered expectations about the public role of women in Orthodox Judaism versus the public role of women in the secular world. So how did you reconcile that, or was it not a conflict? Am I projecting here?
It's a great question. And I think, to me, I learned that it's a lot about the community that you're a part of. So yes, early on when I was at Neve and studying a lot about sort of modesty, not just in dress, but in behavior, right. Not saying everything, not being an open book. I was like, oh, that's kind of not who I've been. Interesting. Let me take note. Let me walk with that. What does that feel like to me to be modest, not just in dress? What is it like to be really sensitive to how I self-express? As an actress, it was sort of like I was cast often as the party girl and the funny crass best friend. And so those characters were absolutely not modest. And I loved that about them. I loved that I was able to live out these sort of immodest fantasies that I had as a younger girl. And then when I thought about that, I had also been really curious within myself, how do I have like a real sound relationship in this industry while being a self-expressed woman? Where's the line for me of connection and flirtation, of self-expression and immodesty? What is that for me? Where is that? And and being super blunt about that with myself, with my teachers, feeling like that I don't get. I had a friend in seminary who was more observant than I am, and she observed Kol Isha, which is like a woman doesn't sing in front of men, only in front of women. And I just could not understand. And we sat and chatted about it. And at the end of the day, it sort of was like, wow, that's so beautiful that you connect to that. I don't. And maybe I don't yet, maybe I will. I'm not a singer so much, that doesn't really affect me, but I would have those conversations, hold space for it, and also be like, that doesn't quite feel like it for me, But whatever it is there that bumps me, I'm happy to sort of sit with. So early on, I didn't get a lot of this shouldn't be about you. I actually wanted it to follow a rabbi. I remember asking several male rabbis if they wanted to be sort of like more of the face of the documentary in the beginning. And they were like, it should absolutely be you. A rabbi will not be relatable. It should absolutely be a young, curious Jewish woman. We need more Jewish faces and we need more Jewish women faces. And so I didn't get a lot of that resistance from people. My learning is when I sort of met a lot of that. Well, a woman her sphere is the private domain, and that's where she sort of finds her most effective energy. And in ways I get it, like I understood from an energy perspective how that might be a part of the truth. But then I met so many fierce religious Orthodox women who were like public speakers and bold and in the public eye, and their photo was printed, right? Because they were part of a community that was okay with that. So I don't think I would ever find myself as part of a community with women who don't show their face, aren't in front of the camera, aren't printed on newspapers and magazines, aren't being bold and showing the way. And I met a lot of those women who were just very loud and proud. And in Israel, you saw that they were winning awards to develop medical research. And they were, in the world, not just in the Orthodox Jewish world as educators, but in the outside of Jewish academic world. So no, I don't personally feel like something else came up, and it is a little personal, but I'll share it just because I think it's important to say. The other feedback that I got was from one of the heads of the seminary itself. I think when you say I'm filming, they apparently turned Barbara Streisand down to film a movie at Neve. And I didn't film on the campus. I had like a little bit of B-roll that you see from like a tiny little thing in the cafeteria. A lot of it was done outside, actually filmed in the Aish World building by the Western Wall. So none of it
just Aish is the male counterpart of Neve Yerushalayim. These are what are known as Kiruv yeshivas. Right. I mean, just for our audience, many people know that these are yeshivot that are for generally secular or more, quote, less observant Jews to come and be immersed. And Aish HaTorah is one, and for men, for boys, and Neve is for young women. So you filmed in the Aish building? Is that what you're saying?
I filmed in the Aish building, and you see that I have the president, Rabbi Stephen Berg, in the film as well. So he was very, very supportive, and he let us use the facility, and he opened his doors, and he was just extremely.
But wait, why was Aish open and Neve not? Because it was the male yeshiva?
I don't think that it's about male or female, and I think it's a great question. That particular organization, I think Neve was just a little bit more precious about that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But it's a good question. I know, right? It's a little suspicious, but I
wouldn't say suspicious, but I bet you my intuition is right.
And interesting, and you're right. And it could be that to have cameras on premises. I mean, I wasn't filming any of their students at Aish or at Neve. Would that be the thing? But either way, I got an email from one of the heads of Neve who said, I thanked him for the opportunity. Once I left, I said, I really grew. This was profound. And he said, next time, do it without the cameras. I think you'll actually be able to connect to Torah. And I felt like that was such a bummer to hear. Mm-hmm. And I, again, in the spirit of being a bold female, pushed back and said, that might be how it occurs to you. But a movie for me actually made me push 10 times harder than I would have if I came without the cameras, because I was fighting for this figurative audience that I felt existed down the line, 5-6 years. And I don't think I would have connected in this sort of way without it. But with all due respect, thank you. And I later shared that with a mentor who's very sort of familiar with the ecosystem. And she was like, wow, I can't believe you said that's fantastic that you said that. I'm so sorry that happened. That is very old school. So there's a lot of reconciling of sort of this old anxiety of, we don't need to show everyone everything. We don't need to bring in cameras, be there, be focused, right? Women aren't supposed to date while they're studying, which I did do. And that was great. I did not date. And I do appreciate sort of being focused, but trust me, trust that some of us can be a little bit different than how we've known a Jewish woman or a Jewish student or a Jewish soul to express, and what that process looks like. So there was some tough stuff that I had to sort of push past, but in the end, it's like when you know what you're doing now, the movie has sent so many people back to Neve, Israel, different places to study. It's not a commercial just for Neve.
So I have a question. So on that, it was a perfect segue. So perhaps you didn't know at the beginning, but when you sat in the cutting room and figured out the shape of it, who's your intended audience?
You know, I thought my intended audience was like people like me, millennials, people who are trying to figure out their life. They're seekers or closet seekers. Because I was like very much a seeker, but there were areas of that seeking that were completely in the closet and in the dark until I started. So I thought that it would be the millennial generation. Little did I know that, I mean, I've spoken to high school groups, BBYO groups, and so high school age, which I thought was like totally, they're not even thinking about marriage, but they are. They're dating, they're self-expressing, and they're thinking about their Jewish identity and what that means moving forward. So like high schoolers, and I'm getting people, you know, my mom's age, 50s, 60s, 70s, who are sort of having this resurgence, identification with their Judaism, and their children are getting married, are married, or getting divorced because of specific things. So the audience was a lot broader than I thought. And I didn't really think the religious audience would connect to it as much as they're connecting to it. I thought it would be sort of like, oh, we know that. But maybe in today's age, we're seeing so much of my unorthodox life, or these things where everyone's sort of leaving the fold. It's been refreshing, I think, for people to see others reclaiming the fold.
That's interesting. That's a nice observation, because yes, there are many, I mean, we could have a very long conversation about this sort of at times salacious ways in which the Orthodox world is depicted, and the attention of people who've left. Not to say that some of the people who've left have very authentic truths to express, and there's no doubt about it. And you know, but it is interesting to think that this film is in some ways an antidote to that, right? This is the kiruv, in some ways the balat tshuva, the returnee from, you know, a successful Americanized career. Okay, so before I ask you what you're working on now and your new media company, I do want to circle back to what I said a bit about being called American Birthright.
Yeah.
So can you tell us what you thought the film was going to be called, and then why you decided on that, and what do you think is American about it? What do you think is the birthright about it?
Yeah, it's a question I've been walking with since the very beginning, because I called it American Birthright right at the top. I thought it'd be fun to create a journey, like I said, across America. Boom, 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 boom. My sister's wedding. I figured it out. Nice little bow. What a fun cross-country journey. And why cross-country across America is because, well, I was born in Israel, and I did the Israel version. So let's do the American one and explore in all of those areas how other Jews self-identify.
But wait. It was an American Jewish birthright. You wanted to look at the Jewish landscape in the United States, or as the American non-Jewish landscape?
The American Jewish landscape. Okay, I wanted to see how other and also I'm sure I would pepper in, like I had a couple other millennial, quote unquote, minority. I don't, love using that word, but like other friends who were also going through the same struggle. My Armenian friends in LA who are like, very much, I get the Jewish thing. My Hindu friends who are like, oh God, we're basically Jewish. It feels the same thing. Our parents also want us to marry, from within. So all of that would be peppered in there, but it would absolutely be the American Jewish sort of experience and the reconciling of identities and what it means to be an American Jew, and also figuring out for myself sort of what kind of American Jew I want to be as I go and face my sister's decision. Because I didn't know I hadn't traveled America like I did Israel. I wanted that. Selfishly, I wanted a really cool journey. I wanted to get in an RV, which we are in now, but years later doing a completely different journey. And I wanted to meet other Jews in America and sort of figure my own stuff out. And when it ended up taking me to Israel, I was like, is this not called American Birthright anymore? Like half the movie's not in America. I mean, I guess I am still assimilating my own, American identity while going back home. So I don't think, as much as we tried to rename it, I was like, is it the to-do list, which is a filmic gimmick that we use in the second act? And
right.
Like, could it be called that? And that felt like too niche and too not it. Then I was like, maybe it's about love. It's Romeo and Juliet. And it was like too silly and not it. It was the names on the cutting room floor were many. And we all just came back to, it maybe just always was and is American Birthright. And it's okay that you leave and you come back, and it's who you are. And that's it.
Mhm.
And so that's sort of what it is. And to me, and I love hearing that you think it's very American, and I think it is. It's very American. It's very diaspora Jew. It's very sort of like, I go to Israel on the trip, but I come back and I try to figure out what that means and all of what I experienced. How do I bring that home? I led a birthright trip, and that's very much sort of the conversation. We all come back, we're inspired, but what do we do with that? Where do we put it? So there's absolutely a lot of my questions, and they continue to be. And yeah, in birthright, it's sort of like, where is that given? Where do you work with I feel like asking you is such a great question too, because I feel like you do a lot of this teaching, a lot of this work as well, in terms of the history of our people. Is like, where does that come from? Aren't we all originally from this piece of land? So yes, that is a birthright, but also where we live and how that shapes who we are. And I'm a completely different Becky. Becky's not even my birth name, right? I don't know that I would have ever become Becky. And if that would have been a part of me, had I not grown up in America and claimed that as a piece of my essence and self. So it's very layered, and I'm still sort of peeling the layers every conversation I have, every time I watch the movie.
Okay, so 2 last questions. How did your family respond to the film?
They were very, very supportive, as you can see.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just like the sweetest, and it shocked me because they're very private. Like my sister, when I first called her and I told her I had the idea, she said, let me think about it. She's just a very private person, doesn't post on social media everything that's going on in her life like her sister does just. And she called me back and said, Justin and I have discussed, and we feel like this is the purpose of our relationship, is to spark this sort of conversation, and how, like, what an honor, let's do this together. So that was really awesome. And I know Justin was hesitant, her now husband was hesitant to see it, because there was a lot of friction between us. And because he knew that I was not 100% in acceptance, and even though there was a lot of love, it wasn't like to have beef at the dinner table. It was always very open, communicative, and loving. But it's still tough when someone can't fully accept you right away because of whatever it is. So it's really nice to be able to share that bump with him, and for him to see the movie and say, wow, that was really beautifully done. Like I feel like you were honest. You were honest how you felt. I felt like I was honestly, it's how I felt, and all the things. And so that was really nice. I'm glad that they felt good about that. And his family has watched it and they were so inspired. And my mom, also very supportive. I think, again, for her, and I always say, I think it's funny, I sort of came back full circle. I'm observant now, and she had sort of left being observant, and there was a bit of a tikkun, like we corrected something of each other. I'm not sure what it is, but we certainly have a very fun dynamic. And she it took a second. It took a little time for her to really just sort of embrace the fact that I am the very thing she did not want to be, and that I can be that differently, and that it feels different and it looks different. And so, yeah.
Well, it's a different, it's called history. I mean, you don't have her baggage or background, even though you're connected to her, right? And you're living in a completely different environment than she, and the American landscape keeps changing, and all landscapes keep changing. So great. Well, thank you. Just to close up, so what's going forward? What do you hope to be doing? I know you founded a company with your husband, and you talk about conscious content. Between you and me, I'm not really sure what that means, but that's okay. If you were my student, I would say, not sure, but you're not my student, so you don't have to explain that. But I am curious about sort of, when you imagine, you're an artist, you're a filmmaker, like what do you hope is down the pike for you artistically?
So Mannafest Media for us was born of, one, COVID times and not wanting to be working for somebody else's company outside, which is fantastic. And also because of American Birthright, and even just at the trailer level, people were turning to me to help tell their authentic, more vulnerable stories through a sort of a more curious lens. How do I connect people to whatever the message is in a less sort of like didactic, over the top, dogmatic way? Can it be a little bit more of an invite of curiosity being the lens? And I loved that. And it was a challenge for me to continue to sort of consult and help people do that with whatever their stories were. And that's what we ended up doing the last year and a half, almost 2 years. We just wrapped up a 10-part series for formerly Jerusalem U. They're now called Open Door Media. They're channel on Facebook is called Jewish Unpacked, and they wanted to share 10 big Jewish virtues in a really cool, fun, social media friendly way. So we just finished those 10 episodes, which was quite a challenge to do and really exciting. And now, yes, client work we love, and we invite people, you know, who want us to help tell their stories in any sort of mindful, when I say conscious, is just like mindful with the audience in mind, a holistic view. And usually the content matter is something that's of good, of positive intent, of edutaining intent. Happy to do client work, but we're also working on developing some original media. And a lot of those projects are telling Jewish stories, Jewish themed stories in what we hope is also a holistic way, in a fun way. One is an Anne Frank piece, and the other is about the idea of a get, which a woman has to obtain to, you know, sort of not be in a marriage, we'll say, to divorce.
Well, it's the writ of divorce for a woman who wants to remarry in a Jewish sense. Yeah, for sure. Well, there's a brilliant film, an Israeli film, I'm sure you've seen it, with the late and extraordinary Ronit Alkabetz called The Get. It's amazing. So Becky Tahel Bordo, thank you so much for joining in this webinar about your film, which I know is going to get a lot of play at our festival, and delighted to meet you virtually, although usually we get to meet people in person, so that's a bummer for us, but we're still in COVID times. Hope you're successful in everything you do, and we look forward to what comes ahead. And this is the end. To our viewers, you're on the website already, but please check out all the other webinars for all the other films. There's also free in-person screenings at Rutgers Cinema for students and others. Make sure you sign up. And there are 2 movie chats, more informal discussions about films. So please join those. So thank you very much. And I hope to see you all soon in person.